This is Bill Parisi, another Jersey guy, which is why I find him very lovely. Bill is the founder and CEO of the Parisi Speed Schools with over 130 affiliate locations worldwide. He is the author of Fascia Training, a whole system approach. He's the author of Anatomy of Speed and Fascia Training in Athletic Performance. He is recognized as one of the most successful personal training entrepreneurs in the world. And he is coming up next month, heading up the Fascia Training and Application Summit in Arizona. So definitely check out the details on that at performbetter.com. I'm sure Bill might mention it later today. And just one quick thing about Bill. I know a lot of people have their specialty in one area. Bill not only specializes in speed, but also fascia and even business, which I don't know if everybody knows. Um, and Bill, I know you're talking about your networking talk this year at the summits in the summer. And as much as I love speed and as much as I love fascia talks, the networking one you gave is my ultimate favorite. So I'm excited for that. I'm very happy to have you here today, Bill Parisi.
Thank you, Erin. Appreciate that so much. Yep, I'm excited for the networking talk. That was an all-time favorite back, and I think that was 2009, and Chris said to bring it back. So excited. Guys, I have a lot of information here today. I'm going to try to make complex concepts in speed development simple for you here today. And it's been 30 plus years of me traveling the world, meeting with some of the brightest minds in the world over that time, and creating a system that we can bring to young athletes and athletes of all ages. So we're going to identify today some the many forms of speed. We're going to talk about the two approaches of motor skill development, what we kind of do at the Parisi Speed School and our training system that we've done for over 30 plus years and over 1 million athletes. We're going to really discover how these systems relate to the human body and speed itself, and the key attributes needed to really create explosive recoil. And that's going to be an element we talk a lot about today is explosive recoil. So the many forms of speed, let's talk about that, right? We know speed is the gold standard for athletic performance. It's the element of success, especially at the younger ages. The faster kids, the more explosive kids, they're going to get most of the playing time, especially at those younger middle school and early high school years, even high school. So we know, I started my company, the Parisi Speed School, because that's a great marketing message. People know what that means right away. People don't always understand performance. You got to understand your parent is your customer and the athlete is the consumer. So we're really speaking to parents. Yes, I've done a lot of business development over the years, consulted and worked for hundreds of performance training facilities over that time. And believe me, I know what works and I know what fails, and messaging is so important. That's why that word speed is an important part. What is the manifestation of speed? Well, it really is about overcoming gravity. Yeah, at the end of the day, you got to harness all the energy in your power to overcome this force. And it's directing that force into the ground or off the ground efficiently to propel yourself through space and time. So gravity is our opponent. We got to punch gravity in the face, and we have to use all of our power to do so. And a lot is similar to a martial artist. I really like the analogy of a Taekwondo athlete performing a front punch, trying to break the boards. And to do that, they've got to stabilize, they've got to focus, they got to concentrate, they got to get the opposite side of the body to brace. A lot of things have to happen to create impact and force. And gravity is our opponent. And we have to understand how to maximize that force to propel ourselves through space. So it all comes down the ability to generate force quickly to overcome gravity. Now, we consider two main categories of speed. Obviously, this is fundamental elements of speed development, but I'm going to start really basic and we're going to get fairly complex here through the next, 52 minutes or so. So really simple. Linear speed, multi-directional speed are the two macro elements or 30,000 foot elements. Let's dive into linear speed a little bit and understand that. Obviously, acceleration, the ability to reach maximum speed in the shortest distance of time. Acceleration is very strength dependent. It's more concentric contraction dependent. We want to make sure that we understand we don't want to rush acceleration. Our feet are going to be on the ground longer in acceleration compared to running at maximum speed. Body angles are important. You can see this body angle of this athlete right here. If he was to stand straight up, he'll be okay putting a weight on his back or, doing a lunge in that position. He's pretty safe. That's the mentality or the visual you want when you talk about generating force. You don't want to you want to get the maximum amount of force. We know acceleration, we want to provide a horizontal, more of a horizontal force into the ground opposed to vertical, where maximum velocity is more vertical based. So, we want to think about these elements, overcoming inertia, understanding the technique behind it, but it's very strength dependent and very concentric contraction dependent for acceleration, right? That's one aspect of linear speed. Then we have our maximum velocity, right? The ability to maintain maximum speed by using max stride length and max frequency. So when we talk about max speed or max velocity, rather, it's more of an elastic component. The forces are more vertical, pretty much dominantly vertical into the ground, opposed to being horizontal on the first couple strides of accelerating. And the qualities needed for maximum speed are different than acceleration, and they're trained very differently as well. So, but I believe the linear speed aspect is the foundation to speed development. And you really want to hone these techniques in the beginning. And this is a great way to start training your athletes and really breaking these up into two separate training components in your program. Sometimes we'll do separate days for acceleration and max speed. Sometimes we'll combine them. We typically don't do linear speed and multi-directional speed on the same days. That's not, how we run our program. They're separate days, but there's a lot of, ways to address these components in training, lots of drills. That's not something I'm going to get into too deep today. I'll show a couple things, but I just want to lay the groundwork how, acceleration is different than max speed from a strength requirement, more concentric. Where max speed, does require strength, up to 5 times your body weight of force goes through the ground when you're running at max speed, but it's a different type of strength. It's a pulsing stiffness type of strength, not a concentric contraction. It's more of an isometric type of strength needed to run at high speeds. We're going to get into the science of that. We're going to deep dive into that, into fascia and co-contractions and dynamic systems. So I'm pretty excited, but my goal is to make it simple. And I'm going to mention all the people I've worked with and learned from over the years, and that sometimes make it a little tough to understand, but really bright people. Let's okay. So real quick, a little bit more on technique and front side mechanics, backside mechanics during acceleration. So just some technical landmarks to think about when we have our athletes accelerate. From a front side mechanics standpoint, right? We want to have our body at a 45-degree angle. We want to keep that front toe, underneath that knee, definitely not in front of it, underneath it or slightly behind it, so we can get the force going down and back in the opposite direction that we're sprinting, right? We want to keep, again, a good 45-degree angle. And it's important that shin has a nice sharp forward angle as well. A lot of times athletes will extend their lower shank out, and that's a braking force and really limits acceleration. And I believe there's a lot of strength deficiencies when athletes aren't able to get in these positions, low back deficiencies, obviously glute, hamstring deficiencies, but really more low back. And I believe the hip flexors are a really important element in being able to get into these positions as well and drive that knee forward, the psoas and the hip flexors. So it's important to really build a foundational strength for acceleration. The backside mechanics in terms of that left leg right there, that recovering left leg, we want to keep that leg as it comes forward a little bit lower to the ground. We're not bringing the heel to the butt when we cycle that leg forward. So those mechanics, front side, backside, are obviously different for acceleration and then compared to maximum velocity sprinting. When we sprint at maximum velocity, the front side mechanics involve obviously more of a clawing action or striking action of that front leg And again, we're never kicking out that front leg. We're pulling it underneath us. And we talk about clawing the ground. And when we do that, we want to really put force down vertically. We really want to punch that ground explosively and violently, like that martial artist, with that front kick or that front punch. The backside mechanics, it's a short, tight lever. When we talk about technique, we talk about our levers, right? A long lever is powerful, but it's slower. A short lever is obviously faster, but maybe not as powerful. When our leg strikes the ground, it's long and strong. So as that front leg comes, through its recovery phase, and now it's extending into the ground. When it hits the ground, it's long and strong. And as soon as you, take off or put force into the ground, and the leg is coming off the ground, the leg has to become really short and fast. So it's a good heel strike to the butt and up. I see a lot of deficiencies in pelvic control where the hips dump forward and the athletes are overstrutting. They're trying to push too long in running at max speed. So you get an anterior pelvic tilt, you get a big kickback in the back of the body, and you tend to don't get good knee lift and a risk for injury, especially hamstring injuries. So pelvic control is really important, and that's exactly where we're going to go to right now and talk about the areas of pelvic control. So hip lock, co-contractions, and postural control. This concept is really important. Franz Bosch has really made this a popular concept, understanding hip lock and what it is. So let's dive into this. This is some of Fran's work. I went to one of his seminars, was really great. He goes deep into this concept, which really is important. And when you think about hip lock, we want to remove the slack, right, to help create more power. And here's how I like to explain it, kind of how I came up with it, teaching it to young athletes, because these could be advanced concepts. And I've, worked with a lot of high level coaches over the last, 30 plus years. I've traveled the world and I've gathered all this info. And my goal is to make it simple to bring to the masses. You know, we train, 50, 60,000 athletes a year. We train, a couple hundred high level guys and 49,000 average kids. And that's how you pay your mortgage for the most part. So how do you bring these concepts into those average kids where you can make a living and more importantly, make a really big impact in these kids' lives? That's where my passion lies, right? How do we get an average kid to be a really competitive high school football player and maybe a college player, right? And that's really exciting. But anyway, one of the concepts I like to teach in hip lock is simply the concept of stepping on a tack. If you were barefoot walking on in your house and you stepped on a tack, what would happen? Well, the foot you stepped on the tack with, you would flex that leg really fast and you would extend the other leg really fast. That is called the cross extensor reflex. We want to practice and develop this skill of cross extensor reflex because that hip extension and flexion needs to be drilled into our athletes over and over again and has to be violent. That cross extensor reflex, that hip lock where that pelvis, if we're it rotates in the transverse plane slightly, it's going to slightly tilt forward, right? And it's going to elevate, right? So it's important in the frontal plane. So when we do that, we want to get the hips in a position where we get maximum extension in the one leg and dynamic flexion in the other. And it almost has to be developed in a reflexive fashion. And you need to practice that. And there's many, many ways to practice the hip lock to kind of get rid of the slack, if you will. And I think that's just a simple cue and an easy takeaway, thinking about stepping on attack. And we do that in a lot of different ways in our drills. So just a little nugget for you there from a training standpoint. So that's kind of the macro level of linear speed, right? Acceleration, max velocity, a couple nuggets on those two elements. And the one thing I'll just go back and say about acceleration, um, I see a lot of times athletes rush acceleration. They try to get a lot of frequency and they're not getting maximal force production. Sometimes some of your best acceleration runs, your 10-yard runs, feel kind of slow, right? Because the stride length isn't too fast because we want to get maximal, stride power into the ground to get that center of mass moving to overcome inertia. So just the more time you spend with your athletes, the more time you get to know them and video them and study them, the better you're going to get at this. There's no substitute for just training hours and training volume. Let's hit multi-directional speed. And again, high level 30,000 foot view to set the tone. How do we define multi-directional speed? It's a quick change in trajectory in any omniplanar direction, horizontal or vertical. That's really how we define it, the difference between being fast and being quick. So it's any direction, up and down, side to side, forward, back, 360, multi-directional speed. Now, there's a lot of factors to multi-directional speed. The first factor is obviously change of direction. This is pre-planned. We know where we're going to go. We're on the offensive side of the ball. These are cone drills, ladder drills. We understand exactly what we're going to do, and we can really focus on these skills that we need to enhance our change of direction ability. Now, one of the most important skills in change of direction is the ability to decelerate, controlled intentional deceleration. Now, we say controlled intentional deceleration because when we're running at max speed, sometimes we have unintentional deceleration. Obviously, world-class sprinters unintentionally decelerate at about 50 to 60 meters. Most high school athletes will begin to decelerate probably at about 40 yards or so, or maybe even less based on their conditioning and their capacity to maintain high levels of contraction. So we call that unintentional deceleration. In multi-directional speed, in our change of direction and deceleration model training, this is called intentional deceleration. And this is a learned skill. And this really is all about controlling your center of gravity. And these are things we teach at the Parisi Speed School. Managing center of gravity is really a staple, and just understanding center of gravity, just explaining center of gravity to your athletes. And here's how we do it. We simply have a stopwatch around our coach or our athlete, and it has a pretty long string on it, as you can see. And now, the stopwatch represents the center of gravity. Very simple. And your feet on the ground represent your two bases of support. So the center of gravity is in between my two bases of support. So if you want to be fast and accelerate, what do you have to do? The first thing you have to do is shift your center of gravity to get it in front of the primary base of support. So the athlete on your screen happens to be my son, and on the cover of our book of the Anatomy of Speed, who's a sophomore now at University of Delaware playing wide receiver, who is definitely an overachiever, and was not even a starter on his freshman high school team, and then went on to play Division I football. So the stuff definitely works, and point is understanding these elements are so critical because we're really starting to kind of adapt some fundamental motor vocabulary skills, and we're going to get into that in a second. But the point is, managing center of gravity, we need to get the center of gravity in front of the base of support to maximize force production and acceleration. Now, on the opposite, it's like the center of gravity, managing center of gravity is like your gas pedal. So if you want to step on the gas, you got to get the center of gravity out in front of wherever, what direction you're going, in front of that base of support. So the right leg in the athlete right there to the right, if he's going to go to his right, our left, he's got to get that center of gravity in front of that base of support so he can drive with that right leg. The left leg right now doesn't have much to drive with. It's basically, it's almost de-weighted right now as he moves to the right, if he's going to accelerate to the right. So the left leg isn't doing much. It helps shift. The left leg will help shift the center of gravity. But once the center of gravity shifted, all the weight's going to be on the right, then he can blast off the right. Really understanding and managing that. So the center of gravity getting in front of the base of support, that's the gas pedal, right? Now, what do you got to do when you slow down? You got to get the center of gravity behind the base of support. That's called putting on the brakes, right? So you got to put on the brakes and get the center of gravity behind the base of support. So athletes should understand this concept and process this. This is called the top-down approach. We're developing a motor vocabulary. We're developing, these movement skills that are going to add up to enhance overall literacy. And we're going to go down this very exciting path of building motor vocabulary to develop greater movement literacy. And that's what we're doing right now. We're kind of building the vocabulary of an athlete by getting him to understand his body and understand movement. So center of gravity management is very, very important. Curvilinear running, really important in terms of, just developing the tissues to run on curves. Now, running on curves is important, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can just set up some hurdles or cones and just run on curves. I've worked a little bit with Bobby Stroups, who's been training Patrick Mahomes since he was 9. And Bobby's speaking at our Fascia Training Summit in Phoenix next month. And Patrick Mahomes runs faster on curves than he does straight ahead. And he needs to, because he's very often not running straight ahead. So practicing running on curves is really, really important, not just for baseball to try to stretch a double into a triple, or a single into a double, but it's really important in sports, in all sports, in all positions. So again, all different types of configurations, all different types of strategies, another element of multi-directional speed. Then we have agility. And this is reactionary, right? It's not pre-planned. This is a reactionary element of multi-directional speed. So we have really 4 components to multi-directional speed, 2 components to linear speed. Remember, so you got acceleration, max speed, and then multi-directional. You got your change of direction, decel, curvilinear, and now agility. Okay, reactionary, and these movements that we do, we could have a strategy. This is actually an athlete working on a side shuffle using blaze pods with a tidal tank on his back. This is actually in my basement doing a training session. This is Chase Basantes. He was a starting right tackle for Texas A&M as a true freshman. He'll probably be a top, 1 or 2nd rounder, and not this year's draft, probably the next year's draft. But a 5-star coming out of Don Bosco, where my son went to school. And this is a really effective approach to training, multi-directional agility, focusing on a side shuffle skill. Okay, and having that tidal tank on his back is going to create perturbations and cause the body to, self-organize and stabilize, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. So I just wanted to give you a macro level of the different types of speed and how we go about training speed at the Parisi Speed School. We take a very methodical, systematical approach to these areas of linear and multi-directional. Obviously, there's 6 subcomponents, and we have drills and programming and progressions for these components on how we want from our warm-up progressions, our specific warm-ups to these 6 areas, to our training progressions. We have a 4-quarter system that we dive into. Let's now go into how do we learn this, right? The key approaches to developing motor skills for speed. So now that you have an overview of what we do here, let's dive into, okay, how do we get athletes to move efficiently? I gave you some insights on some landmarks for some of these skills, whether gravity management for multi-directional or acceleration, overcoming inertia and maximum velocity. Let's dive in a little bit. Key approaches, right? So there's really 2. We see it as being 2 key approaches to developing motor skill development for speed, and for most skills for that matter. The top-down approach, which is more of a cognitive approach, and a bottoms-up approach, which is more of a dynamic systems theory approach. We use a combination of both, and I know there's arguments out there on the internet, which I don't even waste my time to get into, because I really don't care. What I care about is one thing: how am I getting results? How am I getting a kid faster and how am I empowering a kid's confidence where he feels really good about the training and he feels it and sees it. So we don't care where it comes from. We don't care what people think. We just focus on getting results with kids and making sure we're going to get them. So these are our two main primary areas of focus. Let's focus top down a little bit. It's a cognitive approach. It uses internal and external cues to really provide direction and help develop a movement vocabulary, right? And I want you to remember that term, a movement vocabulary. Think about what that means and learning specific patterns. Now, some people might argue, that's not how the body works. The body's a dynamic system. The body, it responds. Well, I disagree. If people can learn how to play a piano, people can learn how to, sign their name, whatnot. There's things that obviously you learn from a motor skill or a motor engram or a neurological kind of pathway, if you will. And some of the things we talk about is, cues, right? There's internal cues, keeping your elbows at 90. And I know you don't keep your elbows at 90 consistently. I know they open to 130 or so, 140, and they can close up to 60 degrees. But we like to coach 90 because if we try to tell a young athlete, okay, bring your elbow, close it up at 60 at the top, and at the bottom it's going to open. They're all confused, right? Keep it at 90, and the natural momentum is going to allow the arm to, if you cue them the right way, the arm is going to open and close at the right angles. And these are just some tidbits working with young kids for so long. You kind of find out what works. And some of the cues you give these kids might not be technically correct. We know that. So we work from experience. Now, if you're coaching a world-class sprinter and you give them these cues, yeah, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. But you can't coach high-level guys the way you coach a 12-year-old trying to, make a competitive team, right? There's going to be some differences based on that kid's training age and athletic ability. So anyway, the internal cues: elbows at 90, split the thighs, snap open the switchblade, right? These are illustrations in our book, The Anatomy of Speed book. Uh, External cues, kind of spin the globe, right? When we're sprinting, we want to, give these cues to athletes, and this is a mental thought, to help elicit a response in the athlete. So we've got some great visuals we've created. Nick Winkleman wrote a whole book on this. Great work on internal and external cueing and the science behind cueing. So really, really good stuff to use. And cues are like t-shirts. They kind of stink after a while. So a cue might work for a little bit, then it might not work. So keep in mind, you always have to change up, not always, but you might have to change up your cueing with your athletes based on the response you're getting. So again, important elements there. So the journey here of the top-down approach, and this is really important. There's really three primary stages. That stage, unconsciously incompetent, I just want to set the tone. A lot of times athletes don't even realize they're incompetent in a skill because they don't even understand the skill. So an example would be managing center of gravity. Well, they might be incompetent in managing center of gravity, but they don't even know, they haven't even heard of that before. They don't even know, like, what do you mean manage center? They were unconsciously incompetent. Then the real first stage, or the cognitive stage, they become consciously incompetent. Like they realize, okay, I understand I got to manage center of gravity, or when I accelerate, I got to get my foot, underneath my knee and run at 45, what have you. That's that first stage, that awareness, right? Then they get into that next stage, this consciously competent, and it's that associative stage. And now they're starting to do it. They're doing it a little bit more proficiently. They're not really great at it yet, but they're getting the hang of it. But they're focused on it. Like they're consciously focusing on it. They become more competent. That's that next stage of motor skill development from a top-down approach. So it starts in the brain, right? We're thinking a thought and it's happening, and we're feeling, and we're making it happen. Then we come unconsciously competent. This is the stage, the autonomous stage, where now we're starting to do this thing and we're really not thinking much about it, and we start to get some skill. And this unconsciously autonomous stage, competent stage, I think blends a little bit with dynamic systems, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. So I just wanted to set the stage here. This is that first stage. I know a lot of coaches, this is kind of their wheelhouse, and this is what they do most of the time. Well, I'm going to introduce to you another strategy on how to train athletes to get more effective in stage three here of motor skill development, which I feel is really important. But wrapping up on the cognitive top-down stage, this is really important. Here's where I see most coaches making mistakes. When they do their drills, the athletes, I shouldn't say coaches, I should say the athletes making mistakes, where coaches need to be really on point correcting your athletes and slowing it down. The intensity is way too high, and then the quality of the drill, the quality of the work, the quality of the movement is really way too low. We've got to slow this thing down. It's got to be a paradigm shift where the quality has to be really, really high. It has to be at the highest. And I want you to slow it down even to an isometric contraction. Like, let's find the landmarks that we need to hit in these skills of acceleration, in these skills of overcoming inertia, in these skills of even running at max velocity, change of direction, deceleration. Let's slow it down to isometrics. And there's a whole strategy on how to do that. Again, which I can't get into in 45 minutes, but use your mind. Slow it down to, isos, and then slowly increase the intensity. Slowly without sacrificing quality. I cannot stress this enough. You just go out and sprint and do drills and do drills and do drills. Everything from the warm up to your transition to your drills. I mean, we have our warm up. We have our what we call our anchor drills. That's our Q2. So our Q1 is our warm up. Our Q2 are our anchor drills. Our Q3 are our application drills, and our Q4 is our challenges in terms of how we structure our training around our multi-directional days and linear days, and we break them all down. But we created I think, a really duplicatable system, and I think that's really important because a lot of it's hard to, as you get older in this industry, you want to try to scale and duplicate and enhance your skills. You got to teach others how to do it. So you need a system that you can teach. It's interesting if you're kind of like this great coach, you got to know how to duplicate it. We've come up with a pretty good system on how to duplicate. Anyway, this is the element of skill acquisition and skill development, quality and intensity. It's a relationship you got to own. So again, movement vocabulary is an athlete's ability, acquired motor skills achieved through using that cognitive approach, right? That top-down motor skill and that motor vocabulary. Now, what is dynamic systems theory? It's a bottoms-up approach. This is our second approach, right? It's dynamic systems. Now, I don't need you to memorize this or get too crazy about this definition, but it's an interdisciplinary theoretical framework is really what it is. It's used to understand and model complex nonlinear dynamics of systems. So, what does that mean, right? I mean, so the top-down approach is more of a linear system. Like it's linear. It's like a pathway. It's kind of like unpacking on how a machine works, right? Well, everything is like if you do this, this plus this equals this equals this equals this. That's a linear system. Um, there's value to that, but the body's not really linear. But there's value to it, and that's where the argument takes place in the industry. I get it, but I believe there's value. But now I believe, I mean, not now, but I do believe there's a lot of value in this concept in dynamic systems. And again, unpacking it a little bit more, the framework really uses external and environmental constraints to get the body to self-organize and adapt to more efficiently and be more effective when performing different tasks. So the key is self-organization to create stability. Here's Dan doing an ankle stability exercise with a tidal tank on his back, barefoot. Now, he's not really thinking about technique. He's thinking about just stabilizing, right? So the body is self-organizing. This is the difference and another way to create a dynamic, system, responsive, injury resilient athlete. And again, we use both of these strategies in our training. And I want to kind of bring up the Biosphere Project back in 1992 in Arizona. There was 3 acres inside a greenhouse. There was, I think, what do you got there? Two, four, six, eight or nine people that lived in this greenhouse for close to 2 years back in 92, called the Biosphere 2 Project. Pretty crazy. So 2 acres, lived inside this greenhouse, no outside contact whatsoever. They grew all their own food, and had animals in there, the whole deal, right? It was a big experiment. And one of the things they did in this project, they were growing trees, right, for different types of fruit or whatnot. And what happened when the trees got to a certain height, some of them tipped over. You know why the trees tipped over? Because they didn't develop any stress wood, because there was no wind. There was no wind. There was no unpredictable stress. Think about that. Unpredictable stress that's manageable is a key element to injury resiliency, a key element. So, I've kind of, the body is more like a plant than a machine. Although, your cognitive approach trains the body more like a machine, there's the argument to that. Dynamic systems trains it more like a plant. I believe we need both. And what I think we've done at the Parisi Speed School, we've really, I'm not going to say perfected it, but I've been doing this a long time. I was a high-level javelin thrower in college. I was a two-time Division I All-American. That's how I started the business. I went to Europe when I was an undergrad, competed in Finland, and I was just a maniac. I'm a 5'10" North Jersey Italian, threw 238 feet, made 3 NCAA Division I championships, finished in the top 8. And for a 5'10" North Jersey Italian, I had to really own every aspect of my skill and my speed running down that one runway. And I'm not really, North Jersey Italians aren't supposed to throw the javelin really far, right? We're supposed to make pizza, lay brick, give high interest loans for cash, be in the garbage business, right? That's what North Jersey Italians do. I love that when people laugh on that one. So hopefully you guys are laughing about that. But yeah, so I say that not to impress you, but to impress upon you. I had to own my technique, like every ounce of my energy. I had to really understand it. And from a performance standpoint, the same thing from a training standpoint. We have to own our technique, but we also have to have the ability to let it develop organically. So we're gonna get into this. So I wanted you to understand the body's a little bit more like a plant than a machine. And one of the things when we talk about dynamic systems, we have to manage the degrees of freedom problem. Now, what do I mean by the degrees of freedom problem? Well, there's two pendulums here. The first pendulum has 1 degree of freedom, pretty predictable, right? So it's a single axis there, back and forth. You can predict it. Now, let's just change it from 1 degree of freedom. Let's change it to two degrees of freedom, and let's see if this is predictable and how this moves. Highly, highly unpredictable. So when we talk about dynamic systems, it's highly unpredictable. And we have to train to manage the unpredictable environment. And that goes back to my greenhouse example of the tree falling over because there's no stress wood, because there's no wind blowing against it. So we talk a little bit about managing the degrees of freedom, the attractor state. This is something that, a car with 4 steering wheels, very hard to drive, very unpredictable. What do you need to do? You need to lock down the 2 front wheels with an axle. You need to lock down the 2 back wheels with an axle. They don't move, and the 1 steering wheel controls the 2 front wheels. Well, the human body, we need to be able to control this entire joint system. Now, one of the guys that has really made this popular is Franz Bosch. He's done a lot of research on this, and John Pryor, also another colleague of mine. I work closely with. These guys are really great. Spent some time with these guys. And when we talk about degrees of freedom, there are a lot of joints in the human body, and they are very much hard to manage, and you cannot do it consciously. You cannot manage all these joints, throughout an athletic endeavor consciously. So that cognitive approach really kind of goes right out the window right here when we talk about real situations in life. So this is where the argument begins. Again, I think it's important. There's a lot of, I think more of the Australians and, like I said, the Netherlands, these guys are on top of this stuff. And I'm slowly unpacking it with these guys, or gaining some great stuff from these guys. Really love where we're going with this and understanding this at a high level, and hopefully I'm making this simple. And again, that's my goal, is to make this simple for you guys to understand and be able to uh, uh, get the concepts right. If you can walk away here with concepts, I've done my job. And again, hopefully I'm hitting a 10 on this presentation to give you guys some understanding on how to go about training speed. But dynamic systems theory, it's really transferring movement vocabulary into movement literacy. So how I kind of package this up in the Parisi Speed School is, we take our cognitive approach, right? That movement vocabulary, those drills and those skills that we're learning and we're practicing, focusing on, and we're cueing. That's our movement vocabulary. And as we kind of add dynamic systems and we add constraints, and and I'm going to show you some ways on how to add constraints, like with the tidal tank bags and things of that nature. That's going to now enhance the literacy. First, we got to learn our vocabulary. Now we're going to have better literacy. So, when we talk about transferring movement to literacy, you got to keep in mind, constantly changing, right? It's an evolving process. It's non-linear, right? The body is not looking for perfect movement, but rather something that works in as many possible situations. And, this is Nikolai Bernstein, 1960, I think it was 67, a Russian scientist. Well, that's not Nikolai Bernstein. That's a blacksmith in Russia back in the 1960s, working in the steel mill. And they studied, Nikolai Bernstein studied this blacksmith, and he noticed, the expert blacksmith, they were hitting the target and were very efficient in producing, results and delivering product in a very efficient manner. And they had really good skill in that hammer hitting exactly in the right spot to maximize the effort on each strike. But what they noticed, that the pathway of the hammer was not always the same. So it wasn't about having the same exact technique that made them successful. It was really the internal adjustments of the entire structure that ultimately gave the best final, that gave the result that they needed. So it's repetition without repetition. It's perfect, results, not always perfect technique. And that's really an important concept to understand with dynamic systems. So it doesn't really use cues. It really relies more on trial and error. So that's the difference between cognitive approach and dynamic systems approach. So hopefully you guys are getting this. Again, these are advanced concepts that you really need to think about, right? And the thing I will say, obviously, motor learning is really it's a development and an adaptive, really problem-solving process in terms of when we talk about dynamic systems. So it's really a problem-solving challenge, right? And one of the ways to think about this is, I actually did an in-service down at the University of Tennessee, and I had to take a picture of this. I did for their strength coaches, I gave a talk on fascia and dynamic systems, and that's their indoor facility, and you can see that's their goalposts, right? And you see the two yellow goalposts. Well, I don't know if they know, but they're practicing dynamic systems with that field goal kicker working to get the ball in between the two yellow goalposts. And that's a constraint, right? So it's called the CLA, the constraints-led approach. And here's a baseball pitcher. There's two strings trying to get it low. It looks like it's low and outside, right? So developing constraints boundaries that shape our movement. It helps facilitate the right attractor. So it helps facilitate the right muscles to contract and relax at the right time to create joint stiffness and joint mechanics, kinematics that allow us to ultimately accomplish that skill. So the body's kind of finding its way, right? And there's three types of constraints. There's obviously task constraints. There's individual constraints where you might have tightness or limitations within the structure. Those are constraints. And then obviously environmental constraints could be the surfaces that you're running on. It's funny. I'm doing some education in Jamaica, and a therapist reached out to me to do some education in Jamaica. They have obviously some of the greatest sprinters in the world, and she was saying there's a lot of injuries. They don't understand fascia, and she's talking about the training, and they're probably just overtraining, but they're running on barefoot. They're running barefoot on rocks and uneven surfaces. They're running in the ocean. They're running on the sand. It's unbelievable training. It's all that unpredictable. That's why they're so great. So I'm pretty excited to go down there because, not always having the greatest facilities is sometimes the blessing. When you have these perfect, grass fields or these perfect tracks and you're working on them all the time, not necessarily great to build injury resiliency. So let me see. I got 10 minutes. I'm going to try to accelerate here. So, when we talk about self-organization, this is a phenomenon that happens in nature, right? When you look at birds or schools of fish or flocks of birds flying together, these animals self-organize to avoid a threat, the threat of prey. So that's why they organize to avoid being eaten, right? And I believe the human body acts the same way. I believe each bird and each fish is like a cell in the human body, where the organization of these birds and these fish, they're flying around, and there's not one leader, there's not one central controller, because there's no way thousands of birds can just listen to one leader and they all are moving in a certain direction. It's basically all the birds are in connection to one another, and when they sense a threat, or one or two senses a threat, they make a move, and that sends like this impulse throughout the flock, and then the flock just kind of flows in all these different dynamic directions. So they're avoiding a threat. They self-organize to avoid a threat. I believe the cells in the human body through fascia does the same exact thing. And that, to me, that's an easy way to explain it. For people to kind of understand how fascia connects and how the body is working from the ground up, but we call it the bottoms up, right? So when a well-trained athlete, when their foot hits the ground, and say there's a divot in that ground, well, that ability for that ankle to stabilize happens. I think. I mean, again, I don't know if there's validated research. There's some research coming out that co-contraction of that ankle, it's not even coming up to the spinal cord. It's happening in the local fascia that's helping to facilitate that co-contraction to create stability and joint stiffness in that moment of time, in those milliseconds. And I believe it relates to these concepts of self-organization that we find in nature. So again, advanced stuff, but a way to really think about it is how the body organizes is a young child hitting a piñata bag. And when you're swinging aimlessly and you don't know where it is, it's a little out of control. But once you locate it and then you can hone in, now you're kind of building these attractor states. So this is called exploration, transferring into exploitation, right? So exploration, you're exploring, and then once you kind of lock in, now you exploit. And that's kind of the essence of dynamic systems and self-organization and training in a way through constraints that will allow our athletes to become more dynamic and more resilient on the athletic field. So hopefully that is understanding. Here's concepts on creating dynamic stability, with, some simple tools. This is a simple, high knee exchange, and we're doing things that are going to work on the body's ability to find stability in ways using different tidal tank bags and doing different types of drills that are going to challenge the core, challenge the stability of the athlete in many ways. Um, so moving along, we believe in both approaches, the top-down approach and the bottoms-up approach. And we're pretty excited about where we're going with our training and what we're doing and how we go about, training our athletes with these two approaches. And we're pretty excited about it, and we're pretty excited to unpack it. So hopefully that was informative. And I mean, I do have a lot more content to share, but what I think I'm going to do with Chris, and we're going to, add another webinar here. We have our Fascia Training Summit coming up in 4 weeks, and also the Parisi Speed School Summit. So it's open to the public in Phoenix. We're really excited. We're going to be deep diving into this stuff with drills and the whole deal. So really a great opportunity. Let me also just get to the slide where you guys can see that. I have a whole bunch of stuff here, which is for next time that I'll get to. But if you want to check out the summit, you can just take this QR code, check that one out for the Parisi Summit coming up. So that's something you can get. And then if you want information about our online certification. We deep dive into this in our 6-hour Anatomy of Speed course. It's really deep, and then we have our live certification as well that you guys can take advantage of too. So again, this was a real high level overview of the Anatomy of Speed book that I've written and where we are at the Parisi Speed School. So I will open it up for questions at this point. Again, I think I stayed fairly good on time here for people and respecting everybody's time. I guess I'll stop sharing my screen. Is that right, Erin, to look at questions?
Yep, that's right. Right now there was two questions, and I hate to say I answered both of them for you.
Okay.
But if anyone has questions, now's the time to do it. Actually, they're starting to come in now. So
Okay, great. All right, let me stop the screen here. And all right. All right. Okay. Is this covered in the book? Um, Part of it's covered in the book for sure. We go deep into drills in the book. A lot of the cognitive approach is covered in the book, so we go really deep into that, and we touch upon dynamic systems in the book. But we really cover it a lot more in our course, our online course as well. Uh, how do you change ankle positioning when cueing acceleration? Yeah, it's interesting. There's a big leakage at the ankle joint. A lot of athletes leak energy at the ankle joint in acceleration, and it's because the soleus is weak. You know, when you have your knee bent, right? When your knee is bent, the gastroc isn't nearly as effective. So when you accelerate, you obviously count on the soleus. So um, when you say changing ankle positioning, I don't know the ankle if it's so much cueing to create ankle stiff. I think it's more of a dynamic systems, kind of like the example I was showing. I showed that example, that drill is a way to strengthen ankle stability. So the question is, how do you cue ankle positioning and acceleration? So I would say, in a lunge split squat position, being on the ball of your feet in a lunge position. One of the exercises I like a lot for strengthening and cueing ankle. So say you're in a lunge position, get up on the balls of your feet. You're in a lunge position, and the front foot. Imagine the front foot's at in the center of a clock, right? So the front foot is in the center of a clock, and I'll just give a cue. All right, you're going to move that front foot to either 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, or 9 o'clock. So they'll be in a split squat position. That front foot is right in the center of a clock. I'll say 12. and then they have to go to 12 and then right back into center. 3 o'clock, back to the center, back to 12, back to 6, 9 o'clock. And they're just working the foot around the clock. That's a great way to, I guess, cue or strengthen ankle because, and again, that knee is bent. So that's a great way to do that. I got to grab my glasses, guys. You know what? I'm almost 60 years old, guys. Uh, it's really sad. All right. Do you prefer both cognitive and DST in the same session? Great question. Great question. Yes, we definitely do that because our warm up is a lot of cognitive. Our warm up in the Parisi Speed School is really, really dialed. I mean, every joint angle is focused on everything we do in our warm up. It is our foundation to what we do. So, yes, the warm up is very cognitive. And for the early athletes, the younger athletes, the majority of what we're doing is cognitive in the first bunch of weeks or months, and depending on the athlete, they got to just build relative body strength. One of the things I failed to mention earlier is the number one way to improve speed is relative body strength, getting stronger for your body weight. That is the holy grail. But as you become more advanced, there's a point of no return for that, right? So 2 times your body weight in the squat is really the ideal number for most athletes. So yeah, so building that fundamental cognitive approach, getting the athletes strong for their body weight, and we can just tell that right away by how many pull-ups an athlete can do, gives us a good indication on relative body weight. So great question there. That was Drew. So Tom says, do you use any movement screening for setting or correcting imbalances? Yeah, we'll just basically do an overhead squat, and we'll just kind of, a down and dirty kind of visual, and we have a whole check sheet in our initial eval. We don't go too crazy. Again, we're seeing athletes 2 to 3 days a week for about an hour at a time, and they're typically in groups. With our one-on-ones, yeah, we get much deeper, in that, but just generally, we'll do an overhead squat, and then we'll give them some basic correctives. But I will say our warm up, just embedded in it has a lot of correctives, basically. Just our warm up, we've been doing for 30 years, and I've been refining over the years from, I've traveled the world, and I'm a pretty modest guy. Like I really enjoy spending time with different coaches. I bring coaches in for webinars, all different high level coaches, and a lot of them are kind of funny because they're like, hey man, I'm really it's kind of weird coming in and teaching your guys. Like I'm always about learning. And then I had the good fortunes, running the NFL strength coaches continued education for 13 years. So I was in charge in helping those guys find speakers to come to the NFL Combine for 13 years. So I assembled a lot of relationships and content over that time. And it was a lot of fun to do that. But yeah, anyway, I don't know how I got on that tangent, but definitely the point I was making, really, I think you can really create a lot of those balances and get rid of those asymmetries in the warm up if it's structured correctly. And we have a warm up that does that. Um, how do you test if it's a soleus weakness issue or inhibition issue because of poor mid-foot control? That's a great question. One of the things I don't know if we necessarily have a test. I mean, I would if there was an issue, um, we send them to the therapist, but we train our athletes. We start them barefoot, right? So feel that everyone can gain foot strength. So, in a controlled environment, even our younger kids. I mean, we instruct them just for the beginning. I mean, if you're a beginner, it's just the first 5-10 minutes of the warm up. We come in barefoot. We're going to start our bouncing movements. We're going to start our warm up barefoot. And depending on the athlete and how long they've been with us, they'll do a good part of their warm up barefoot. Some of my higher level athletes, my college athletes, I'll go through a whole workout barefoot. I'll go through, and it's controlled though. I have a basement. It's not that big, but it's matted, and we'll do a whole change of direction, you know, session barefoot. Now, I don't recommend that. I mean, these are kids I'm very, very close with, and one of them's my son, and these are kids local with me. High level. I mean, one kid plays football. One kid plays at Oklahoma. The other kid is at Yale. One kid Texas A&M. my son Delaware, but it's very, very focused. So I mean, take that with a grain of salt. But barefoot for sure, in terms of the foot, in terms of strengthening. Uh, I'm not an expert in anything, but I find using a steel mace beneficial for self cues. Might be interested to try. Decided to make the comment after I saw the blacksmith. Yeah, interesting. Okay, that's good. Uh, Myofascia slings when it comes to first. I definitely, the question is opinion on myofascia slings. 100%. These things obviously exist. I was on the Fascia Research Society. I was a board of director for 3 years. These are the top researchers in the world. Robert Schleip is a top three researcher in the world from Germany on fascia, uh, from Germany. And he did an ultrasound on Thomas Roller's right pec. Thomas Roller won the gold medal in the javelin in 2016. He's a German javelin thrower. And he did an ultrasound on Thomas Roller's right pec to look at the fascia underneath. And he found a 4 millimeter thick strap going across his right pec. He's a right-handed thrower. He found a 0.5 millimeter across his left. He basically had like an Achilles tendon coming across his right pec. That's due to mechanical transduction, basically a fancy word for the body laying down fascia and connective tissue, that really aids in mechanics. So I do believe in the fascia slings, and they do exist. And I've done fresh cadaver dissections, not only with Tom Myers, who's a friend and a colleague I work closely with over the last number of years. We ran our own fresh cadaver dissections. Actually, ran one for the NFL strength coaches about 5 years ago. So absolutely, and they get developed based on our movements and how we compete and how we train every single day. But that's a whole other fascia talk, which is I get really passionate about and excited about. Okay, we got somebody here. Let me see the question. U.S. Army, all right. But you get out there for a lot. Oh yeah, I'll be happy. Yeah, I'll be happy to do a presentation for 2,500 soldiers. Sign me up, Rich. Do you apply Myers Fascial Alliance or training? Yes. Do I apply Tom Myers? I think Tom is a genius. Tom Myers is brilliant. We run a whole webinar series with Tom Myers. I do about 6 different webinars a year with Tom. I bring in different subject matter experts for anatomy trains. We collaborate with him with Fascia Training Academy. So yes, I really love what Tom does, and Tom's the first to admit, he's not someone that's claiming scientific fact. Although he puts a lot of information in his books, he's got so much practical experience that backs it up. So, really, really great stuff. Well, guys, I hope this met the mark for all of you guys. If you guys ever need anything, I mean, listen, we have a great event coming up, man. First time we're opening it up to the public. It's in 4 weeks from Friday. And we're actually, if you want to come and get Parisi certified, that would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and our live certification, pretty powerful coming up in Phoenix, Arizona. Great way to take a trip. We're, first time doing this in conjunction with Perform Better and the Fascia Training Academy. So I'm super fired up about it. I think I got all the questions, Aaron, and hopefully, we made a lot of happy Perform Better customers today.
I think you nailed it, Bill. And thank you to everybody for attending. Bill, looking forward to part two. Good luck in 4 weeks
Yes.
in Arizona. And everyone, we will see you next time.